Hey guys, what's up? Welcome back here to today's edition of Advanced Bass Fishing, and really appreciate you guys coming by the channel to join me for the video today. Always appreciate that. And guys, today I sort of wanted to have a just sort of a wide-ranging talk on winter bass fishing, sort of explain to you a little bit about some of the myths and misconceptions about what bass do in the wintertime, and give you guys some good techniques and things to try coming up this winter. So, one of the things we found out, or I found out a lot about bass fishing, is what fish do in the wintertime. The preconceived notions of what they do are completely wrong in many cases. And I'm sort of going to tell you guys about my experiences and some things that work for me to catch fish in the wintertime. So I think it's going to be a good video for everybody. Also, guys, quick invitation. I just wanted to remind you guys that all through the month of November, we got about 2 weeks left. They've got their Black Friday sale, 20% off on about everything on the Tackle Warehouse website. If you guys want to go into the description of my video here and click on that link, if you use that link, it's a good way to support the channel and get you some good deals on the Tackle Warehouse stuff. So much appreciated with that. Okay, guys, wintertime. I remember back when I first started fishing, when I was a teenager, people thought you just didn't fish in the wintertime. It's just very difficult to catch fish, and fish were dormant because they're cold-blooded like turtles and snakes, and they just didn't bite. And if you did catch a few, you had to work your baits like a snail. So we have found, moving forward to 2024, that's not the case whatsoever, because I don't notice much difference as far as the behavior of bass in the wintertime anymore than I do like in the late fall and the early springtime of the year. Because most of the time we don't get these super long periods of cold weather in most parts of the country anymore. If you've got water temperatures that get down to the 40s, that's exceptionally cool. Most people for lakes across the country, especially if you're anywhere sort of in the southern, not way south, but in the southern half of the country, you're talking about water temperatures, in the low 50s in the wintertime, which is not really cold. Fish can be extremely aggressive in low 50-degree water temperature. So sort of want to talk a little bit about what the fish do in the wintertime and then some ways you can catch them. Now, one of the things about wintertime fishing is you've got 3 different seasons within the same winter season. In other words, you have early winter patterns, you've got, midwinter patterns and late winter patterns. And the early winter patterns is when the water temperatures are starting to cool off to their coldest point. Normally in December, this happens. And then the midwinter is when the temperatures have bottomed out and they're colder than they've been any other time of the year, normally January. And then by February, you start having the late winter where you start have a gradual rise in water temperatures based upon different weather patterns. And the behavior of the fish is pretty distinct in each one of these phases that I sort of want to go into. Now, a lot of times when you're dealing with early winter patterns, there's not much of a difference between early winter patterns and fall patterns. If you have water temperatures in the 50s, there is a ton of things that work, guys. I don't care, where you're at, but if you've got water temperatures over 50s, that opens up a wide range of techniques: chatterbaits, spinnerbaits, crankbaits, jigs, finesse stuff. Anything that you want to throw there could possibly work. And then when you get more into the dead of the winter, your options are a little bit more limited if your water temperatures fall into the 40s. Now, if the water temperature stays in the 50s, not so much, but if you have water temperatures in the 40s in the dead of the wintertime, a lot of your techniques are relegated more to the more finessey, deeper water stuff: jerk baits, Alabama rigs, swim baits, possibly some crankbaits, but it depends how actually cold it is. So the fish get more in a traditional winter pattern once the water temperature gets in the 40s. And then once it starts to creep up again into the 50s in the late winter time, that's when you start noticing the return of a lot of the different other lure categories. Again, back to your spinner baits and your crankbaits and your chatterbaits and, all that type of stuff. So anyway, okay, how do you approach that? What's a good technique for approaching this? First thing, one of the things that I like to do is in the winter time of the year, I usually always focus on the major creek arms. Main lake structures can be decent, but I feel if you've got a couple major large creek arms in the lake you're fishing that have deep water within those creek arms, you've got fish that live in there all year long. And I have found in my own personal experience that in the wintertime, the fish that are in those creek arms tend to be a little bit more shallow and tend to be a little bit more active than the fish that are out on the main lake. I'm not really sure what it is, but it seems like in the wintertime, once I start moving out to the main lake, the fish, they get deeper, they tend to suspend more, they don't tend to be near as predictable. And if I stay in those major creek arms, most of the time I'm dealing maybe with just a little bit warmer water temperature, you've got a little bit more of a diversity in cover, and it just seems like it's better habitat for the fish. So in December, January, and February, I'm usually in the major creek arms of the lake. So next thing with that is the type of areas that the fish use. They can use the same type of spots all year long in the early winter, midwinter, late winter. Points and secondary points, and specifically, are places they live all through the phases of the wintertime. If you have a secondary point in a creek arm, there's going to be bass there all winter long, December, January, and February. The only thing that's going to be different as far as how you catch fish on those points is going to be the weather patterns, things like the sky conditions and the water temperature. If you have water temperatures in the 50s and you're fishing some type of a secondary point in those creek arms, a lot of different stuff can work. I mean, you can catch them on crankbaits, you can catch them on small swim baits, Alabama rigs, jerk baits, and the same as it gets into the dead of the winter. But the difference is between the early winter, late winter, and the dead of the winter. In the dead of the winter, you have a lot more of the fish that are truly in that suspended mode, where they are grouped up into smaller wolf packs and they're suspended over various water depths. Now, in the earlier part of the winter and the late part of the winter, a lot of those fish will live on the bottom, and they come up on your bait to hit a lure, or they hit the bottom lures, again, like the football head jigs, Ned rigs, swim baits close to the bottom. But it seems like to me, once your water temperature bottoms out to whatever it is in the area of the country that you're fishing in, that's when there's a lot of fish to be caught suspended in the dead of the wintertime. So here's sort of how I like to go about catching fish in the wintertime in those 3 months in those major creek arms. First thing I do, like I said, I always look to the secondary points every single time without exception. If I go into a secondary point like in December and I notice my water temperature is still in the mid 50s, I'm going to go with a little bit larger lure, offering, maybe some type of a 5 or 6 inch glide bait, 5 or 6 inch swim bait, especially if I got some wind. I'm still thinking I can catch them on a crankbait under these conditions, so something like a rock crawler or a wigglewort fished on those points. And I will, still throw jerk baits a little bit, and they can be productive too, but normally if I'm fishing a jerk bait, they're in a little bit shallower water. So if the water is in the 50s in December, I'm usually concentrating on those points in less than 10 foot of water. And also that time of year, if you've got any channel banks within those creeks, those channel banks can be really good. I like to slow down with like a jig, fish the rocky channel banks with a jig, maybe something like a Ned rig. Again, parallel those rocky banks with the same type of wigglewort or rock crawler, and maybe even parallel those channel banks with a jerk bait. Now, once the water bottoms out and you start getting some super cold nights and it's January, you're going to notice a little bit of a change, and those fish that were in less than 10 foot of water on those points are going to move out deeper on those points. But most of the time they're going to suspend out there. So based upon your water clarity, is going to be how deep you want to fish. So I don't really fish lakes that have less than 3 foot of water visibility in the wintertime. They're not that good. So I'm normally concentrating on the cleaner water if I've got cold water in my part of the country. If you guys are fishing down south, it's not quite the same, but in my part of the country, I'm going to be concentrating for those looking for those clear water lakes where I can get out there in January and get my boat in 20 to 30 foot of water, and I'm sort of casting into that 10 foot of water instead of fishing the 10 foot of water. I'm looking for those fish to be, sort of in that zone of, suspended 5 to 10 feet down over 15 or 20 feet. So I'll be right back, guys. I got to get a text here. Okay, guys, like I said, sorry about the interruption there, is when the water temperatures start to bottom out. That's when I look for cleaner water situations where that water visibility is over 4 feet. And once you have over 4 foot of visibility and you have some clear water, most of the fish tend to be suspended in those situations. They can suspend in little wolf packs. They can suspend, in individual rogues. Like just rogue bass running around out there. But I have found in a clear water situation, when that water temperature, especially is in the 40s, this is the prime time to catch suspended fish. And there's 3 different ways I like to fish for them in January. One is with a little swim bait, like a little 2.4-inch Kitech or that Megabass 3-inch Spark Shad. Fishing it on 6-pound line, just fishing it through those suspended fish areas. Out on the ends of the points most of the time. Those fish will suspend on the sides of the points and the ends of the points. Same with the jerk bait, and the style and depth of the jerk bait that I'm fishing depends upon the depth I think the fish are at. And you can also find, you can have a good starting point to know how deep to fish by graphing those points with your 2D sonar. Pay attention to the depth that the bait fish are at. That'll give you a good indication. And then I'll follow that up with an Alabama rig. Now, small Alabama rig, like a little finesse one with a little small swim baits on it. And I'll use the Alabama rig if I've got some winds or clouds, a little bit nasty conditions. The jerk bait is also good in nasty conditions or cloudy conditions. And if it's really tough and bright and sunny, that's when I like to go with the little swim bait. Now, this is, again, the same things there. The points are my primary focus in January. I don't really fish the channel banks quite so much. To me, it's just all about points. Now, if you do have a lake that has a lot of blueback herring in it rather than third fin shad, in January, those fish will get in the middle of those coves, in those guts, and you can do the same techniques there in the middle of those guts, jerk bait, little finesse swim bait, or an Alabama rig. Now, in the later winter, once it starts warming up a little bit, and when we talk about later winter, we're not talking about any type of a significant rise in water level, water temperatures. We're talking about increased daylight hours and really, really slow, gradual rise in water temperature. So say, for example, if your water temperature by the end of January has bottomed out to 45 degrees or 48 degrees, by the end of February, you may have like a 3 to 4 degree rise in those water temperatures. But that's significant because when you have a 3 to 4 degree consistent rise where your nights are a little bit warmer, your daytimes are a little bit warmer, and the sunlight levels and the daylight hours are increasing, that is sort of like the early stage of the bass getting ready for the spawning cycle. The very early stages of it. And by doing that, those fish begin to move a little bit shallower. And the thing that they do in the late winter time is they don't necessarily go on the bottom until that water temperature gets about 5 to 10 degrees above the lowest temperature that it bottomed out in January, but they will move shallower and suspend. And they also start dispersing a little bit more on different type of areas. So in February, I'm still fishing the points like I did in January, but I'm also expanding into like the bluff banks and the channel banks and the rock transition areas. Those fish will move up into those shallower rocky areas, even riprap's real good, and they'll suspend, but they'll suspend shallower. They may suspend 3 to 4 feet deep over 5 to 10 foot of water. It's just sort of something they do. Now, if you have a little bit more off-colored water, say that water visibility is in that 3 foot, 2.5 to 3 foot zone, I start probing that a little bit more in February as those water temperatures warm up. So the primary patterns that I use for February, again, are the same 3 baits on those points. That'll still work because there's always some fish hanging out there, but I start to move to those other areas. By the month of February, bluffs, rock transition banks, riprap, channel banks, and I go back again to like the wide wobbling crankbait or the narrow wobbling crankbait, one of the two. So I'll use some type, maybe like a flat-sided crankbait if the water visibility is around 2 foot or so, and then if the water visibility is around 3 foot or so, I'm back to the wigglewort or the rock crawler or something like that. And once that water temperature starts to get, like I said, about 5 to 8 degrees above its coldest point, that's also a good time of year to fish a jig or slow roll spinnerbait. So that's 3 of my prime big fish things, the way to catch them is slow rolling a big spinnerbait down those channel banks, fishing a big jig on the channel banks, and also, mixing it up with a jerkbait a little bit along those rows. But so much of it, guys, in the wintertime, it depends on where you're at, and it depends on the weather patterns, because sometimes you'll get a weather pattern in where you have an abnormally long period of super cold, below normal temperatures, And then sometimes you get a weather pattern where it's above normal for a long period, and that will affect the fish too. And type of lake that you have depends on it. You know, if you're in a rocky highland lake like we have here in Missouri, it's going to be different than if you have a lowland lake like, you know, Lake Seminole or Lake Eufaula in Alabama. So everything's going to be a little bit different relative to that. But one of the things I've noticed is the winter patterns that I just described, it's pretty much relegated to, like, you know, Oklahoma, northern Alabama, you know, and up from there. If you like live south of Birmingham, Alabama, or south of Dallas, Texas, or south of Atlanta, Georgia, you don't really have winter time, and the fish don't react to the winter patterns like I'm talking about if you live north of those areas. So, which is a lot of the lakes, you know. So it's all, like I said, it's all relative to the part of the country that you live in. But anyway, guys, that's just a few, you know, off the wall, just random thoughts about winter fishing. Hope you can incorporate it into your fishing somehow, and we'll talk later. See you.